Okay. You can turn one off.
I didn't quite get that. I think the echo maybe is still there, but for purposes of me sharing some thoughts with you, maybe it's not echoing. So should I just maybe proceed?
Yes, we're good.
Okay, great. Well,
All right. Well, yeah. Let's go ahead and we took our break. Took a little bit longer than expected, but we do have the commissioner here with us. And we wanted to make sure that he got in front of us and kind of welcomed this task force to its meeting. So with that, Commissioner, I'll turn it over to you for kind of the welcoming words. Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you all for assembling and for the chance to be with you and for our guests as well. And I don't know if this gets said at every meeting on the topic of broadband where there are remote participants, but I would like to give a note of thanks for the fact that I have broadband good enough and you have broadband good enough and all the other participants do to be able to join this meeting remotely. I'm coming to you from my sunroom today after spending 8 hours in the car yesterday traveling around the state. But I appreciate this opportunity. And the fact that not every Minnesotan yet has the same opportunity because their broadband isn't good enough just underscores the fact that obviously we still have work to do together. And I wanted to offer greetings on behalf of the governor and lieutenant governor and to thank our task force members for their service on the task force. And, you know, speaking of the governor and lieutenant governor, it was just about 6 months ago that they announced that I would have the opportunity to serve in this role as commissioner of DEED. And so I began on June 20th, and hence I'm about 5 months into the job and still feel pretty new. I'm certainly still learning a lot. But as I like to say, I intend to be learning a lot even when I'm not new because the job is big and the issues are always changing. And in fact, I invite all of you to please keep educating me and influencing me so that I can do my job as well as possible. Since I think this is the first time that I've joined you, I thought it might be worthwhile just to share a small bit about my background since I don't know everyone real well. I come to this job after spending about 6.5 years as president at something called the Initiative Foundation in Little Falls in central Minnesota. And that's where I still live to this day, not in Little Falls per se, but about 20 minutes south of there, out in the country in a housing development. It's kind of near Rice, Minnesota, if any of you know where that is on Highway 10. So again, the importance of broadband is really critical to me. I spend a lot of time in the Twin Cities, but I spend a lot of time in other places as well as working from home. So at the Initiative Foundation, that organization was focused on community and economic development in 14 counties and 2 native nations of central Minnesota, and did a lot of work as a DEED intermediary on childcare, on small business relief grants, on entrepreneurship promotion, et cetera. And to some extent also on broadband. We often look to the Blandin Foundation with a lot of admiration for their leadership on broadband and worked in partnership with them. And so I'm delighted now that in this new role, I get to continue on some of those issues. And then prior to the Initiative Foundation, I was an appointee in the Obama administration at the Small Business Administration for a couple of years as chief operating officer at headquarters in DC. And then a couple of years before that, I was in Denver as the regional administrator overseeing a 6-state region. It was called Region 8. And it actually was the most rural region out of those that SBA is divided into. And so rural is kind of a key part of my background. Although I am a rural person who, again, loves being in the metro and likes to see myself as a sort of a bridge builder across what can be somewhat of a cultural divide. And in any case, I emphasized as a candidate for this role that I do have a rural background and a greater Minnesota background because I think it's important to bring that perspective to the cabinet table. And this is a topic, this broadband issue, it's a topic where it is relevant everywhere. The inequities are everywhere, but in particular, in greater Minnesota, we have some of the bigger challenges. So I just want to thank you all again for your participation in the task force. It wasn't long ago, the Star Tribune ran another article underscoring once again how important this all is. I think I've got it up here, November 25th. Minnesota turkey farmers say expanded rural broadband could help detect bird flu sooner. So just another reminder. A question that I get asked often as a new commissioner is, what is my vision for the agency? Maybe what is the special Matt Verilek initiative? And I've mostly punted on that and said that in the aftermath of the governor convening his Council for Equitable Economic Expansion, which then produced a 10-year roadmap to achieve that goal of equitable economic expansion, I felt like that gives me a lot of direction already. It gives us as an agency a lot of direction already. And then in addition, we had this historic legislative session where our agency was given the honor and responsibility of deploying something like $1.8 billion across the biennium. That's much bigger than we've ever had before. It includes lots of new things like standing up a paid family and medical leave program. We have the Minnesota Forward Fund, which is like $400,000 for us to support the chips industry and other industries where a federal match is key. And then on the broadband side, $100 million from the state, along with the $652 million that we are anticipating from the federal side through BEAD. So we have in front of us a massive responsibility, so that I think if I came in and said, I have one more thing that I would like to have everybody do at a time when we're all working pretty hard to deliver effectively on those other things that I just mentioned, it wouldn't have been well received. And so I've said our goal is implementation, and specifically it is scaling for growth. We are implementing, but in a way that is beyond what we've done before, and really the work of this task force and the deployment of that large investment of federal and state dollars for broadband illustrates that point. And so I think you know very well, probably from your interactions with Bree and her excellent team, that our staff have been busy accepting public comments on the Digital Opportunity Plan, which has been submitted recently to NTIA, as well as our BEAT plans. And I've seen those consultations happening because one thing that every commissioner does in the state of Minnesota is an annual consultation with our 11 tribal nations. And so specifically, I get in the car and I go to our 11 tribal nations, which is why, 8.5 hours yesterday were drive time. And one of the things that we've done this year, which I think has been fantastic, again, thanks to good broadband, is bringing in Bree and her team to those consultations so that in addition to the other economic development topics, she has had an opportunity, along with Diane and Hannah and others, to talk about the work that we're doing and to get insights from those tribal leaders about what are the on-the-ground challenges and opportunities that they see. And so it was earlier this week, we also had NTIA at one of those. And so I thought that was a great example of intergovernmental partnership. We know that coordination is key at the federal level. And by the way, Pew helps a lot with that too. And so I felt really good about that consultation and the others that we've done. And so really there's been a lot of substance behind that consultation. So just to recap a little bit about what you helped us to do, the totals that I have listed here are that we've deployed $167 million across 2 grant rounds just in the last 12 months, which will connect more than 46,000 homes and businesses to high-speed broadband. And before that, we provided nearly $130 million in border-to-border grants to connect more than 57,000 homes since 2014. So that's massive impact, and it's a credit to your insight, and it's not the end, and we got to keep going. Also, and I won't go too much longer here, but I did want to say a special welcome to Catherine and Jake from Pew as they discuss trends that we need to be aware of in the industry. I think Bree yesterday, right after our consultation with one of the tribes, was going to pick up Catherine and maybe Jake too at the airport. And so Bree is a multitasker, handling consultations, handling VIPs, and deploying broadband. So big thank you for their participation and their general support of what we're trying to accomplish here in Minnesota. And just as a closing observation, I want to underscore again that broadband expansion is a key priority of me personally. It's a key priority of our agency. It has bipartisan support from the legislature, and it's a key priority of the Walz-Flanagan administration that I am a part of. That Council on Equitable Economic Expansion that I mentioned earlier named universal broadband access as one of its key priorities, one of the ways that we achieve equitable economic development and expansion. And specifically, it recommended the following, which I'll just remind us of. One, that we ensure every child has access to the internet, appropriate hardware, training, and online learning. And that partly relates to our digital equity and opportunity plan. Also, that we provide affordable access to broadband internet, appropriate hardware, and training for every person in Minnesota to expand digital equity and access to government services, healthcare, jobs, community resources, and social connection. And by the way, social connection being so important in this era of heightened isolation. Obviously, broadband is a way that we can address that to some extent. And then finally, that we drive economic competitiveness for Minnesota, enable communities throughout the state to attract and retain residents and businesses by providing affordable broadband access. That allows people to live where they want to live and in some cases work remotely. And so that's very important as well. Obviously, Minnesota, above average in so many wonderful things, is very good at this. And you probably saw back in May, U.S. News and World Report ranked Minnesota #1 for internet access in the country. Even so, I think the figure is 290,000 Minnesotans still don't have adequate access to allow them to take advantage of the opportunities that some of us do. So that, again, is what remains for us. Your task force helps us to address that inequity to the benefit of all Minnesotans. So thank you once again for letting me join. I would be happy to have any dialogue or conversation you'd like to have, but I know we're also going to hear from our friends at Pew. So I will stop there and take this wherever you'd like. Thanks again.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate those opening remarks and really kind of appreciate the support as well for this task force, and both from Bree's group as well as kind of broadly. I know it's an area you deeply care about as well. With that, any questions from the task force members or the commissioner? I'm not seeing any here in the room. I'm not pulling up online either. Thank you.
No, just thank you for joining, and I know it's hard traveling all over the state like this. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome.
I thought maybe our DC friends might ask me, why did you ever leave beautiful Washington, DC?
I can't imagine why you would ever want to leave.
Honestly, there's a lot that's great about DC also, alongside some of the dysfunction.
Yes.
Also, have you been there in August?
Yeah, that alone is enough. Yes, yeah.
And Minnesota is
a little bit more affordable.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But yes, I've worn wool suits in DC in August, and it ain't great.
No. You gotta put those away.
Okay. Well, Commissioner, thank you so much for being with us. You're obviously welcome anytime, and may even tap you on the shoulder, especially when there are some things we'd like to hear more from you. So, again, thank you again for being here with us today.
My pleasure. And I'm going to hang around to hear the next bit of the conversation as well.
Perfect. And that's a perfect segue into the next conversation, which will be a presentation from the Pew organization. And thank you today, Catherine and Dave, for being here with us. And I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. I also, Commissioner, thank you for the very gracious introduction, and Bree and all the team at the Office of Broadband Development for bringing us out here, and all of you for sacrificing some of your time on the agenda to hear us chat about the work that we do on broadband and digital equity generally. I want to know, Carla, are we able to get this up on the shared screen? No, I did, but if you can't, that's fine. We can share them afterwards. I can just use Jake's. We can we'll hear afterwards.
Or I can join you join chat.
Okay. Well, he's figuring that out. I can't be trusted with things like that. Let me just talk to you a little bit about Pew generally and who we are as a team before we jump into some of the national trends and what we're seeing happening across the country right now. So, the Pew Charitable Trust, they're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. Our job simply is to use data to make a difference. We just got a new tagline, so make sure I'm saying it the right way. But if y'all aren't familiar with Pew, or you don't know us through like NPR, which is how my parents, they're like, oh, you're going to the NPR organization. We work with policymakers at every level of government and cover a variety of issue areas, ranging from economic conservation and protecting watershed areas to broadband and state fiscal health. So Pew's done a lot of work in Minnesota generally. And we, as the Broadband Access Initiative, have greatly benefited from the lessons and the leadership that Minnesota has done in the digital equity and broadband space for many, many years. So if you could, sorry. So who are we? The Broadband Access Initiative. So our job generally is to work again with lawmakers at every level of government to help make progress on closing the digital divide. Let me also say, because all of you know, you can't really close the digital divide, but we're going to keep narrowing it. And the way that we look at that is ensuring that everybody across the country, first step, has not only access to a connection, but that connection is affordable, because price still remains a barrier to folks getting. And so we do that and through really three core areas of work. Jake is going to talk about the support that we provide directly to state programs, like the Office of Broadband Development. We work also directly with state lawmakers, doing a lot of education. What is broadband? What do you need to understand about the policy space? Explaining all of these fun federal programs that are being implemented right now and what they need to be paying attention to. But our work really is grounded in research. And information barriers in this space in particular have been a significant, have been barriers to making progress on closing the digital divide. And so we not only are looking at what is the problem, but how do we identify actionable solutions for y'all to solve it? So what can you learn from other states? What can you learn from other programs? And what can other states learn from places like Minnesota? So we carry that research forward to work with federal and state policymakers, then to keep refining the laws and programs that are here to ensure that you are prioritizing fiber, to ensure that we are thinking about affordability at the very beginning, because now we are at the most expensive part of solving the digital divide. And if that network runs in front of someone's house, but they can't afford to get online, that's sunk costs for the public sector. We don't want that. So how do we ensure that that network is affordable? How do you work with the private sector to understand how they are calculating profit, how we can incentivize their participation in these programs? And finally, we at Pew love states. We are big believers in the leadership from states and what we can learn. Our goal is to help cement the role of state government when it comes to narrowing the digital divide, because y'all do know at the most local level what your communities need. You know how these programs work. You know what makes them effective. So Jake, I'm going to turn it over to you. Sure. And I'll come back to the public comment period after you're done.
Sure. I'll just introduce myself. I'm Jake Barn, Associate Manager with the Pew team. I joined Pew about 3 years ago from the National Governors Association, where I was working on their broadband portfolio, and relying on Pew's research in my own work. And I'll just kind of reiterate a little bit what you said, in that we stood up this technical assistance program in the acknowledgement that we'd done all this research leading into the pandemic, identifying all these best practices that states were deploying in their broadband programs, kind of almost in response to the lack of a federal investment in broadband, that states were stepping up to the plate and really crafting local solutions that met local needs. And then this funny thing happened in 2020, where the pandemic kind of wrenched everybody to realize the scope of the digital divide. And Congress, in their infinite wisdom, looked at research that Pew had done and looked to the states to help solve the problem. And so we tried to transition as a team to continue this research initiative that we were doing to promote what the best practices were, while also helping those same states reckon with the massive wave of new federal investments, with the requirements that are coming with them at the same time. So we've set up a bit of a network of state broadband leaders to complement the new relationship that the existing state broadband leaders network has now with NTIA, because they have $65 billion. The relationship changes a little bit.
And we don't.
And we don't.
Yeah.
Well, and so we try to provide some, connective tissue for them to be able to learn from another real time, while providing the real-time research that we can do, while informing our long-term research into determining what is effective practice, how we're measuring impacts. So that's kind of our goal right now. And I think that brings us to this moment.
Yeah, the field in general. So we mentioned that we do a lot of research. We do, and much as I'm sure you guys would love to hear the long list of active research projects that we have underway. There are a few things that we do want to draw your attention to. First is that Jake and his immediate team are looking at, right now they're analyzing all of the state documents that are being shared with NTIA right now to just learn what states are doing. How are they thinking about the challenge process? How are they going to engage local government? How are they integrating their digital equity work into the BEAD program? So if you ever have questions around what are states doing on this, or has anybody mentioned, so this is non-specific, but has anybody mentioned this? Give us a call. Because if we don't know, we may be able to find somebody, or if we're not tracking it, we may be able to find someone who can help you. So as part of that, we are also looking at how states are spending capital project funds. And Diane and Bree have both mentioned this, but a lot of the challenges that states are having right now, that y'all are having, you are not alone. This is the first time that states have been responsible for administering federal funds for broadband deployment. Does anybody remember the State Broadband Initiative Program under ARA? Anybody? Yeah, Diane, of course. Yeah, this is not the same thing. So this is the first time that the federal government is interacting with states and giving them a fund, and using them as a funding pass-through in order to address the deployment and the deployment gaps across the country. That is a lot of active learning as people are very eager to get money out the door. So states are not only responsible for the capital project fund allocations for their own state programs and for addressing all these BEAD requirements, they're also responsible for accounting for other federal broadband programs that states actually don't have any jurisdiction over. So we mentioned earlier that there's a deduplication process in this part of this challenge process. RDOF is going to be one that you're likely going to hear about a lot. Reconnect is another one. States don't have any control over where that money goes. But nonetheless, Bree and her team will need to account for those awards as they are going through this initial proposal process and they're preparing for the challenge. So we talked earlier about the importance of the challenge process and the public comment period. This is why that's important. The states need the most up-to-date data that they have because Congress has charged them with the responsibility of this potential deconfliction of federal funds. We've discussed the December 27 deadline at length, and Hannah earlier mentioned that states are also in the process of drafting these digital equity plans. As we all know, plans are, and we've got local organizations who work with local leaders in the room. Planning is very important. It builds buy-in, helps people know where you're going, and it provides a benchmark to measure progress against. Plans should be based on funding, and you need to know what you're planning against. So it is challenging for states, and not just Minnesota, to plan to draft these digital equity plans and also address how they're going to ensure that those digital equity programs or digital opportunity programs complement the BEAD deployment. It's tough to do that without knowing what the funding rules are, as well as how much money they have. So Minnesota benefits from having a really collaborative culture and a wonderful group of humans from across sectors who are eager to work together and ensure that the state gets the support that they need and that your community gets the service they need. So to the extent that you can continue being assets to the state in that process, please do.
Sure. I think you covered everything very well, so I'll try not to be too repetitive here, but I'll try my best. So as Captain said, every state's kind of facing this challenge right now. It's obviously unique ways. Every state has a unique challenge, unique topography, unique structures for their broadband offices, unique staffing constraints. But a lot of these challenges are also very similar in terms of having to deploy a CPF program while simultaneously preparing for the BEAD deployments, while working against planning for a digital equity plan that you don't really quite know what the grant program will actually allow you to do, while having to keep track of federal fundings that continue to flow into the state that you have to avoid, like potholes in the road. Although I guess a good pothole because it's being filled, right? So we've been tracking a little bit about how states are using their capital projects funds. We can share more information, maybe ask questions. Essentially, because of the flexible nature, states use them in flexible ways. Some using very large, funneling all the money into one big grant program to try to knock down their unserved and underserved location count. Sometimes tranching it up, as I believe Minnesota did, into the line extensions versus bigger funds. Some targeting specific initiatives like looking at MDUs and affordable housing. So we're still tracking all that and how those are actually going to go into the field. The dollars have until 2024 to be actually allocated and spent. So there's still a little bit of room for the 2024 to 2026 to spend. Yes, thank you. To work through that. But essentially, we're getting close to 100% of that money being allocated. So that's $10 billion towards a lot of this problem that's currently being invested in. So, but because of the nature of that program, it was emergency rescue funds. It was purposely flexible. And as we've talked at length already, BEAD it's a kind of return to federal grant making norms. A lot of the requirements look very similar to the requirements for large Department of Transportation grants or large Department of Energy grants, in that they have historical preservation requirements. They have permitting requirements, as we've talked about. There's a lot of reporting that will be required to make sure that everything is lines up. So while other state agencies continually deal with those programs, broadband offices have not had to do that before, and nor have maybe providers had to interact in that same way that a DOT subcontractor does that on a daily basis. So there's definitely some learning curve here, some growing pains to be had, and it all needs to be done very quickly because the timelines that we've talked about are very tight. We've already talked a little bit, everyone's facing unique challenges, but one thing we are looking at, because of this very iterative and purposeful planning process that every state has gone under, releasing these 5-year action plans, these initial proposals, documenting, meeting with communities. I think we have a running count of total community engagements that broadband offices have had over the last 12 months. It's in the tens of thousands. So people have been out meeting with their communities and have been identifying the specific policy barriers that they will be facing to implement BEAD. We're trying to track those to document to state legislators what potential potholes again will be to getting BEAD dollars out the door. But it won't surprise anybody that permitting is on the top of that list. 811 locate capacity. It's just permitting capacity in general, because this is going to be a massive inundation of construction contracts all at the same time in a way that a lot of states and local offices may not be ready for. So that's going to be a known challenge. And then but within that, there's a lot of opportunities within the golden handcuffs that BEAD provides. As NTIA talked about earlier, there's a lot of flexibility that each state can propose within those confines. Investing in workforce development or having specific fair labor requirements that tailor to the state's needs. Obviously, those go subject to public comments and subject to NTIA review, but there are opportunities to really push the needle towards making these programs mirror Minnesota's priorities. So every state's kind of grappling with where those lines are, what they want to do versus what NTIA will approve versus what they can actually get done. So it'll be an interesting next 4 months to see where all that shakes out if they actually get to that March deadline that Diane referenced. And then just kind of one foot into the future. Catherine, I don't know if you want to touch on this a little bit too, but one thing we are actively thinking about is that this is a one-time sort of investment, but the challenge is not going to be gone 2026, 2028. In terms of both physical infrastructure, the needs of the internet will continue evolving. We will need to have stopgap measures to get people online as soon as possible. But we know that the needs of being online will continue to change. And then also, of course, the digital skills and devices and affordability challenges will persist despite this massive opportunity to make significant progress So we're thinking more about how broadband offices, the role of this position will need to evolve and change over the next few years. And then how more sustainable funding mechanisms like state universal service funds, as well as federal programs, will continue to play into this. And all of that relies on, of course, the continuing momentum of some of the existing federal programs, such as the Affordable Connectivity Program, of which we all, I think, know in this room is desperately needing to be additional funds injected into it.
It's already been authorized.
Yes, yeah. But we need that commitment to know that that program is going to be there because everyone is planning against it. And if that goes away, then I think every plan has to get reworked significantly, to say the least. So I don't know if you want to touch on more of that before we see the floor.
Already an uplifting topic to end on. No, the Affordable Connectivity Program, one thing I was remiss in mentioning earlier when I was talking about why we need in CPF, first time federal funds are going to the states, there are also higher standards in both of these programs than federal broadband programs have had before. They are not quite as high as those in Minnesota, but they mimic some of them. So one of them is around the requirements for affordable access. And that's not just because we know that price is a barrier to access. It's also because we know that providers need that cash to make sure that they need that certainty of a customer base, the reliability of revenue. ACP addresses some of those risks and can offset some of those risks for deploying in low density areas, or where folks just may not be able, and where folks may not be able to action. If ACP goes away, I don't want to speak for the providers because I am not one. I think it raises a lot of questions about whether or not we can actually get this job done on affordable access. And then who's responsible for picking up the bill? Now, Minnesota, again, maybe in a different situation than other states, but the fiscal outlook for states is not great right now. And while we have, there's bipartisan buy-in around the importance of broadband access, that is not an argument that we need to have. That is fantastic. We are coming back to repeating questions from lawmakers around, well, how do we measure the impact of this? What's the economic benefit to my community? How do we guarantee that this does lead to better healthcare outcomes? These are good questions. We want folks to answer these questions. The challenge is that they're tying that to funding. So we need to keep pushing. We need to keep learning. We need to so for those who work with local governments, who work with other industries like healthcare, we need your voice and your perspective at the table to help us figure out how do we measure this the right way. I think the last piece before we open it up for questions, on public comments and engagement, what we have found so far, both in working with federal agencies, states, as well as NTIA throughout this process, the more specific you can be, the better. So what do you like about the border to border program? What is effective about that program? What incentivizes providers to participate? How does it support local governments in participation? Talking about what has made this program successful and why there has been such strong engagement is going to be really helpful for NTIA to understand and figure out how to make this program work best for Minnesota. Similarly, where you can flag, these are where existing guidance or recommendations doesn't work for us. Again, the more specific that you can be or risks that you can flag in your public comments, the more helpful that will be not only for your partners indeed, but also for NTIA. We saw that through the letter of credit process. It went from, well, people are just vaguely saying that the letter of credit is going to be a barrier. Well, that conversation kept progressing to specifics on the financial risks that it would pose to providers, solutions and alternatives that were being proposed. So the more specific evidence that y'all can provide, the better off the program will be.
Just touch.
It's not public friendly, so it's not public. Okay, so the initial proposal, and if you have is like not what it's an application, right? So for maybe the layman, it's not the most accessible information. Comment. You don't need to go line by line, but just say, you know, here's our feedback generally on what we would like to see this program do. So.
Yeah, I would just, one thing I do want to mention we touched on too is the challenge process, which we had talked about for this upcoming period, making sure the maps are as accurate as possible. And the challenge that every state now has inherited of trying to improve upon the FCC map to make sure that they're funding specifically BEAD eligible locations. So as Diane laid out, only 3 types of individuals are not able to directly challenge map. They need a partner, they need a local government, nonprofit, or provider to challenge on their behalf. States are looking at these portals where an individual can put forward their information, and then that can be cobbled together to a bundle program. But this is kind of the last best chance to make sure that these maps are right. We know that the FCC process was complicated and did not accept speed tests, for example, in a way that left it very hard for an individual to actually present the reality that they're living in with their service. And so this is kind of the last moment where they can speak directly to their state agency and say, this isn't actually what I'm receiving, or maybe there's an error that this provider has accidentally included the block that they never actually got to. So it's going to be really hard though, because the licensing structure for getting cost-plus data needs to be you need to be requesting the license application now if you want to be an eligible provider and get in that queue. And there's a lot of education that needs to be done to make sure that every stakeholder and partner understands what they can challenge and how, and what will eventually be able to be adjudicated upon. So happy to talk more about that, but yeah, it'll be a really important challenge for the next 4 months.
And to Daniel,
or sooner if you're
sooner, to the question earlier regarding, you know, is the juice worth the squeeze? It's easy for me to sit here and say, like, yes, absolutely. So I'm not the one doing it, or working with local governments to help them do it. But we have seen a significant difference in how members, I'm sorry, I'm letting you, your boss has been on this for a while, but members of Congress understanding that where there are challenges with the map, why the data that was provided was not only insufficient, but didn't accurately represent what's going on. My point is the fluency within Congress around why we need to improve the accountability and oversight of federal broadband funds and the broadband map in general. That has changed so much within the last few years, and that's a direct result of engagement from folks at the local level, raising their hand and saying, we got a problem. So if things don't get adjudicated in the right way, but you still have the documentation, we participated in this process. Like, we felt that we proved this still isn't working. It's helpful to have that documentation. Congress is paying attention. I don't know if that actually makes you feel any better, but sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But from where we sit, we have seen I would call it a significant sea change within both chambers and on both sides of the aisle, just in their overall fluency and willingness to take action on it. So with that.
Questions that we have time for?
Yeah. So questions for Catherine and Jake?
You mentioned measurable outcomes and that lawmakers are sort of questioning, what's in it for my district? What's in it for the communities that I represent? And I think for those of us at the Capitol, we get that question all the time. And it's that question, and also, like, when are we going to be done? When are you going to stop coming to the Ag Committee to ask for more general fund resources? We have billions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars coming in from the federal government. When do we check the box and say we're done? And I think it's always hard to explain to lawmakers, like, yes, we're installing, we're deploying future-proof technology, but the goalposts are changing. The needs are always going to be changing from a consumer perspective, and that's why this group thinks about, updating speed goals and what does new technology, what can that do to address some of these goals? But where do you see, because I think the metrics, the data, where do you see Pew kind of plugging into helping a state like Minnesota tell the story not just through anecdotal data from, you know, my city council members that, you know, have somebody coming in to say, you know, we hear the school age kids doing homework in the McDonald's parking lot. That was like the favorite, you know, anecdote of the entire conversation around broadband. But
yeah,
where do you see Pew fitting in helping a state like Minnesota tell that story through data, through productivity, through better outcomes that we can point to the lawmakers to say, this is working and we're going to have to do more of this?
yeah, it's a great question and one that we're grappling with right now. Sorry, I hate when people say that. It's a great question. I know it's something else. But I think I'm empathetic on the conversation with lawmakers because obviously we're having the same ones. And for us, one, to answer your immediate question, what can Pew do? We are actively working with Michigan State University and other partners in the field to try and capitalize on what is inherently a natural experiment through these federal funds of how do we measure from start to finish these in the impact, the local impact. How do we tell that story through, especially at the very local level, and then pull that up to regions within a state and the state itself? Because all you work in economic development is a really hard thing to measure. But we have the opportunity right now to establish some benchmarks, to start thinking about how we can systemize data collection across the country and begin to actually answer those questions. And recognizing too that this is a short, medium, and long-term evaluation. But Congress did charge NTIA and states to answer this question. So we need to start thinking about that right now. We can't wait until 5 years to actually start measuring it. So that's an unsatisfactory answer, but you know, would love to hear your take and from your members on what do they collect, what do they want to learn, and what do they want to be able to measure, you know, about the impact of these programs. I think the point on state lawmakers, it is, I think we often forget about that baseline conversation. We can't get to those healthcare outcomes. We can't get to more jobs until we have that baseline of that affordable access. And then from there, you keep refining, you keep advancing, you keep kind of picking off those households as we go. But that's where we always redirect the conversation, saying we have to get this baseline. So when we do come back asking for more, we're talking about, you know, wireless in the last acre. We're talking about digital literacy training, helping small businesses adapt to this new operating environment. That connection challenge is gone. It's off the table. Again, unsatisfactory answer. But I think the helping lawmakers understand what progress has been made, and being able to go in with some of this evidence to say, you can feel confident that this investment that you're making is going to yield these outcomes because this is what we know to be true. I also think too, anecdotes are okay. You know, like, you know, we just have to figure out a way to help everybody document those anecdotes and then turn them into data, but don't just qualify it. Sorry, the research field is always qualitative versus quantitative. Yeah.
Can I just add a quick thing on that? And so, sure didn't have this information because it just came out, but I think one of the things in Minnesota is that the new maps are out. The new map for do a certain unserved. And the previous was 291,000 folks without our speed goals for 2026. And now it is down to 229. So that's a $62,000 drop, proving that what we're doing is working. However, that is why right now that map and those challenges have to be correct. And we have to have a final, more, you know, a baseline, because, you know, we are showing it's working, but if people are missing. And then we also have to recognize those are the most expensive and the hardest and to serve. And so that's going to creep down. I mean, if regions have been, you know, all it's even harder because the cost is still skyrocketing because of the options. So also telling that story that though the numbers are going down, that doesn't mean the cost is necessarily keeping up with, you know, cost $8,000 per cost today. It's 17, you know, next year and so on and so on. So I think there's like a lot of correlation. And I know you know this, from the very beginning of the meeting, I have not gone on record and said, by any means, that's not enough to get what we consider in Minnesota served. So I think we just need to make sure we're managing those expectations.
Other questions or comments?
Out of curiosity, this seems like an impossible task, but have you guys tracked how much has been spent by local communities through ARPA funding on broadband expansion? Minnesota's, I feel like, has been from township, county, city level, very active in standing up their own broadband grant programs or just working directly with providers.
Yeah, I think it's about, well, from state, I think it's about $7 billion combined state and local fiscal recovery funds been spent on broadband based off of treasury reporting. That was last updated, I think, in March of this year. So I think they're supposed to come out with new numbers. They'll keep doing so because that will also need to be deduplicated against, unless you were trying to propose some form of match system. Then you have to deal with all that, as NTA alluded to. It's going to be very dependent. But yeah, the vast majority was through states that has been reported on so far, and that's about 6.5 or so of the $7.5 billion that came through the missile program. Right?
Yeah.
I think that's right.
Yeah, Treasury has a tracker and then they would go in and I can send you the link of.
And I think they're right now in the process of going back to all those awardees and getting them to convert to the FCC BDC locations so you can actually track which are being served. So that's a bit of an effort.
Mm-hmm.
Any best practices you're seeing states are putting in place before the big funding is coming? Like when you talk about capital fund budgets, et cetera, and there's many ways to slice and dice that. Any best practices you've seen other states kind of put in place?
Well, I do think one thing we've stressed is that Minnesota, I think, is in a unique position for is the advantage of having state funds in this pool, in that you have total control over it. Obviously, the ARPA funds were very flexible and you had control to wide degree of control of that. But having your own state funds in there allows you to fill in the gaps in different ways. That said, administering the will be a full-time job. So there's that. I think it's a moment right now of community engagement and making sure everyone understands what the challenge process will be and how, if you being very clear if you're communicating, as I think Minnesota is right now, active CPF awards versus forthcoming BEAD awards, and trying to make sure everyone's on the same page as to what dollars can be used for what and when, and how to continue to engage with the states and make sure that they're aware of all of it.
Mm-hmm. I think Jake works more on the program side with the state offices on a day-to-day basis. I do a lot of work with legislatures, so I will answer this question through that lens. The receptiveness of state legislatures to say, okay, what do you need what do we need to change, or what do we need to adapt in order to make this money work best for the state? The difference, I think, is that most of those states are not Minnesota and don't have the legacy statute and legacy programs to fall back on. However, you have a number of states that are still looking to Minnesota for the guidance. But I think from a best practices standpoint, there's exactly what Jake talked about around verifying the education component. But I think the states that will be the ones to watch in the coming years are going to be the ones that have state legislators who are active partners at the table saying, what do you need? And how do we identify sustainable sources of funding in order to make sure that these investments don't go wasted? Because a lot of them are either experience the clawbacks from the last federal Recovery Act program, or quite frankly, don't have a lot of faith in the feds to sort things out, particularly when it comes to things like AC.
One last best practice I neglected to mention, I think Minnesota can also be looked at to for good example for the states is interagency partnerships. There's a lot to be done on workforce development, permitting, working with departments of transportation on their existing conduit and for JIG-1s. So there's a lot of opportunity right now. A lot of states are putting in writing that they will partner for this forthcoming program, but those that have already built those existing relationships will be ahead of the curve. Doing good talks and how to get good stuff.
Yeah. When you have state agencies who traditionally are like DOT, But now there's a little bit of a kumbaya moment. Oh, this is great. Look at my progress. The collaboration is certainly there. And I think there's not to put another thing on the plate of the state offices, but I think in some cases, the state offices are playing an education role of, this is how it's affecting your constituencies, or more specifically, because those agencies certainly know, but here's how these funds can help address that, or here's where we need you to play a part as well. So that interagency coordination, it's not going to go anywhere. Hopefully. Sorry, the need is not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
There we go.
See any other questions? So thank you so much for making the time to be here with us and giving us this overview and give us some insights, some really good insights there. Okay, we got 2 more topics. I think we try to be quick with them and then we try to end on time. So one was free.
Just a couple, just a couple things. So I think Michelle is, I think, the only new staff person right now that you have not met. Michelle Rempels is a new grant specialist on her team. She'll pass on or not.
She's in Wisconsin at the beginning.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, she was covering another event for me. Anyways, she comes from us from Department of Commerce. We're really excited to have her on our team. And then next week we do have a new office manager starting to backfill Carol as she was moved into a grant specialist role as well. And then one more who has accepted an offer that will start in December as well. And there's a couple other positions we're working on, but trying to continue to staff up for the needs as you heard there are plenty. And so just want to share that. If I thought I brought this up last time, but just to share as well, is I was appointed to the Governor's Infrastructure Resiliency Task Force. And so we are about halfway through these meetings. We are charged with putting a final report together for the legislature. It is a lot of different government agencies, county, pollution control, all of the things you can imagine. Colorado and Michigan have done this, and so there's some models out there. And so I'm representing TEED on that because we do have the most federal dollars running through right now for broadband. So that has definitely been a learning area for me. And then as you are probably, I think I mentioned, round 9 of the Board of Grant program is out right now. The deadline for submissions for applications was December 7th at 1:30, not at the end of the day. So something to just make sure to note that's different, as well as the new grant management system we're using in there. We have, it is a system that is using in other departments, and there have been some slight glitches. So please be sure to be communicating if you have any pastor, again, those that you know we're submitting to make sure that, and we have a pretty good check and balance. If somebody did the pre-application and we're not seeing it in the portal, Carol and the team are following up and making sure that we're catching them early so it isn't an issue. So a reminder that's 50 million, 20 of which will be put into the rural population density. Let's see, and we, as I said, we have another 50 million we need to spend. We cannot spend that till July 1st or go into contract because it is 3 to biennium. But we want to move aggressively with the application process ahead of time so that we can get all those locations that will have a commitment from us out of the big dollar final proposal. But I will just note that there is some strong talk, and I don't know that it will stick, but with the legislature, there's some possible supplemental funding that might be coming, or at least fought for broadband. So if that happens, that could also add to the mix, which we desperately would take and want and need, but it just makes it a little bit more challenging. And the only other thing I think I want, and you know, Devin Baldry was our legislative person for D and for broadband specific, left, but Darielle is probably going to pick that up, and you will all know her. I mean, she's been with D for many years and knows the broadband, so I'm feeling really good about that. I think that's all. I think I can stop there unless there's questions.
Are you in a place where you can disclose that you're making an official supplemental budget request for general fund expenditures for broadband deployment, or not yet?
I am not specifically. It is you talk about a conversation through the governor's office. Yeah, there's just stuff up in the air going, we might. And so I'm just sort of mentally preparing for what that looks like.
Well, keep us posted, obviously, let us know how we can be helpful in conversations with the administration too.
Thank you. And I mean, I think you also gathered, there's so much unknown. We don't know with the BEAD and the requirements and going back to anything that they can put in writing, which is why then we have something. Because if it isn't, we're not going out there soliciting changes from legislature, and we have a short-term legislature. So the more information we have ahead of time would really be beneficial in preparing for the spring. But as of right now, I mean, I don't have any specifics. I mean, all of you work towards that. You're here to provide the information you need to do so. But there's just so much unknown.
Any questions for Bree? Other questions? Anyone online either? Okay. Well, let's move on to the last topic of the day before we break. The last one is that I mentioned at the beginning is this concept of subgroups. I think they're super useful. It's not going to add too much work to the task force members, but it is helpful to break up into some small subgroups where we can talk about specific topics. And the majority of the output of that is really what presenters should come to this task force, right? So it would be good to hear from. Obviously, Pew was great to hear that from them today, but who would you like to hear from in the future? Depending on the topic, it's easy to say, hey, I think this is a good presenter or topic we ought to discuss. They will become more relevant when we get to the latter part of next year, where we have to put a report together. And so by topic, what are some of the recommendations that we want to put forward? And so these subgroups can talk about those specific challenges and recommendations related to that. In the past couple of years, we've used a writer to put together our recommendations. I foresee we'll try to do that again unless there's any obstacles with that. And we say writer, it's not a huge document. PowerPoint presentation is something that works really well. But again, we're going to help coordinate that. We'll have somebody do that. But then what we put in it is the recommendation that would come from these subgroups. So as far as what are these subgroups, I'm going to have really quick. So just based on, and they may change, so for the moment we're thinking this, at least I'm thinking this, they may change as we talk about it some more, but based on when you did your introductions and you were kind of mentioning the areas of interest you had and the things you wanted to solve for or have a discussion about, the three, and we have to have 3 subgroups at least. I know one of the previous terms we tried 2, but the problem with 2 is you may run the risk of having 1 additional task force member on it. Becomes 8, and that's a quorum for a meeting, and then becomes open law, meeting law, etc. So it's best to keep it at 4 or 5 if we can. But the 3 topics would be 1 would be around affordability and digital equity, 1 around mapping, funding, and policy. So this is where Steve goes to potentially be a discussion there. And then the third one is around this economic opportunity. We talked about a little bit today about how would you measure the impact that broadband's having, or what are some of the things we would want to have an impact on. So that would be the area. Haven't assigned anybody yet, but what we'll do is I'll work with Carol and Bree to be able to send this out, and then you can say, we'll ask you for a first and second choice, right? So given choice, this is the subgroup I'd like to be on. If that's too many people on that one, my second choice would be this one. Hopefully we'll get that back from you before the next meeting, and then at the next meeting we can say, here are the subgroups, and then we'll give more directions on kind of what to do there. Again, not looking to add a ton more work, but these are just a way to organize sort of our work in the process we put together. And we usually end up, when you're focused on a specific area, it's easier to come up with some solid recommendations and some of the work, things like that. So that's kind of what we're thinking for subgroups. Any questions or comments just right off the bat? Yeah, like I said, we'll send out a note, sort of before even the agenda comes out next time and say, here's the 3, you have some little mapping you can do, and then at the next meeting, at least at a minimum, at the next meeting, we'll say, here's how the subgroup came together. If for some reason you end up on a subgroup that you really didn't want to, although you said it was second, but I really didn't want to be on that, we can always make adjustments and changes, but usually they worked out pretty well. Okay. Any questions, comments on this? Oh, I do have one question. Go ahead, Amy. Maybe not.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, did you have a question? I saw your hand raised for a second.
Oh, no. Let me lower it. My bad.
No worries. I want to make sure I don't miss it though. So, okay. So with that, any other open items, comments anyone wants to make, or things maybe didn't cover today? Want to go ahead.
Just a question, given Bree's talked about supplemental budget and the timing and development of that with the governor's office. Does this group, do we want to have any input on that? And what would the timing of that be? I'm just throwing that out.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was actually thinking about, but as you heard, there is discussions about supplemental, but it's not clarified yet. So, I don't know what we can do right now.
Okay.
We'll have a meeting again.
So that's what I was wondering. I'm just sort of throwing it out there and saying, is that something we can?
Yeah, and we have a meeting in January. We'll see how things progress. And
Okay.
typically when these put together letters in the past, it's usually good when it's like, when things are hot and heavy.
Timely, yeah.
Right, yeah. So I think because there's nothing concrete at the moment, there's not a lot, but that is why we constantly have these updates so we can hear it, and then obviously we'll put a letter together.
Just wanted us to be thinking about it.
Absolutely.
And one thing I didn't mention that we're working on is an RFP for our cost data analysis, sort of specific to those questions. So, an outside source, providing information based on, it would make sense, but Diane helped me here. It would make sense when the maps are finalized to then go, what is it actually going to cost? If we were deploying 100% fiber, if we were deploying, what that makeup looks like. And I think that would benefit me and will benefit the community and, make or make these in general.
Yeah, I mean, we've been saying the 652 million is enough, and that's based on the task force report numbers, but we're trying to get a number from the neutral third party entity, and also one that projects out a few years, given none of this is going to be built within a couple of years.
Good.
I thought that it was really, one of the presentations brought up a really important point about how Minnesota weather will impact the performance of all of our contracts. And I feel like that should just be like kind of a baseline for any contracts that we are issuing. I mean, we got to be realistic.
Yeah.
To the public comments, please.
Yeah. Any comments or questions for anyone that's not on the task force, that's maybe online or ready to move there? Yeah, go ahead.
So I know the challenge process is going to be very tight. We have certain agencies or organizations that will be asked to be mobilized. I think there'd be value in understanding what that looks like. And I know you guys are working through that, but perhaps that's a January topic. Especially if we've got local units of government involved, I think there's a vested interest to engage in this, and we want to be timely and responsive. So, welcome an opportunity to learn what those look like.
Do you plan on using the line extension at all for some of that data? That's already there for folks that put their addresses in and, said they don't have access to 25/3 to those communities to start that? Or is that totally separate with the line extension? It's separate. We're looking at using the portal that's being developed for the beat challenge process to assist with the line extension program moving forward. Okay. There's just been a ton of issues going from shape files and service areas to location-based data. Been a lot more complicated than I think anyone thought. So we're not really like, it's more less mapping, more spreadsheet work. Okay.
And I totally flew over the line extension updates as well. We did do our first round of awards, and hopefully all of you are aware of that or have heard. The first round, we collected 2,300 addresses. We awarded 4.3 million in this first round, and we had over 2 million in match, and that will serve 843 locations. If they all get complete. And as you know, it'll roll, all the ones that we do bids will roll over. I think we're at like, is it 3,400 total now? For Carol's.
All of the agreements.
3,500. So I would encourage everybody to continue the second round goes, that we're start reviewing on November 13th, but it is rolling. So we spent 4 million, a little over 4 million was first. We have 15 million that's capital projects. Then that has the 2026 deadline to use. So we need to be conscious of that, but I would encourage you all to continue to spread that out. And that is information and data.
Okay. Any last questions, comments? All right, with that, well, thank everybody for your time. Thank you for being here with us again today. Thank you for working team to put this together. And with that, we'll bring the meeting to a close, and we'll see you in the meeting.